Today, we explore the remarkable story of Nelson Lee, a man whose life intertwined with one of the most powerful Native American tribes of the American frontier, the Comanche. Taken captive in 1855, Lee endured 3 grueling years among the Comanche before his bold escape in 1858. His account, chronicled in his memoir 3 Years Among the Comanches, offers not only a glimpse into his personal trials, but also a perspective on the strength and intricacy of the Comanche people. In the 1850s, Native American tribes like the Comanche fiercely protected their lands against the relentless push of westward-bound settlers. The Great Plains, spanning from present-day Kansas to western Texas and New Mexico, were a battleground of ongoing conflicts, with Native raiding parties striking frontier settlements to counter encroachment. It was during this turbulent era that Nelson Lee, a man in his late 40s, set out on a journey that would forever alter his life. Lee, a spirited adventurer, began his career as a sailor in the Navy before enlisting with the Texas Rangers. His experiences included fighting in the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848, a conflict that redefined the American Southwest and extended the U.S. border in the former Mexican territory. After the war, Lee settled near Corpus Christi, Texas, earning a modest living by trading cattle and capturing wild horses. It was in this frontier region that Lee's path fatefully crossed with the Comanche. The Comanche were far more than a nomadic horse tribe. They were unrivaled masters of the plains, a formidable cavalry force shaped by centuries of survival and adaptation. Before the Spanish introduced horses in the late 17th century, the Comanche were often overshadowed by more dominant native groups like the Apache. The arrival of the horse transformed their way of life, ushering in nearly 2 centuries of dominance. By the 19th century, the Comanche had risen as the preeminent native power in the Southwest, earning the title Lords of the Southern Plains. Unlike the semi-agricultural Apache, who adopted horses while maintaining farming practices, the Comanche fully embraced a nomadic horse culture. Horses became the foundation of their economy, warfare, and identity. They could traverse hundreds of miles in mere days, striking with devastating speed and accuracy. Their raids, targeting settlers, travelers, and rival tribes, were often executed under the cover of darkness, leaving little opportunity for defense. Yet the Comanche story is not solely one of conflict or conquest. It is also a tale of resilience. Their ascent to power followed centuries of displacement by other tribes. By the 19th century, their collective memory of marginalization fueled a fierce determination to resist external threats. Their way of life was a powerful testament to adaptation and survival, even as outside forces sought to erode it. As we delve into Nelson Lee's journey, keep in mind that his encounter with the Comanche reflects not only his personal struggles, but also the broader narrative of native strength, resilience, and the complexities of cultural clashes on the frontier. In 1855, Nelson Lee and his companion William Atkin embarked on a daring but ill-advised mission to drive a herd of mules westward from Corpus Christi, Texas, toward Matamoros, a Mexican city near the Texas border. Historical maps confirm Matamoros as a key trading hub, but their planned route cut through the heart of Comanche territory, a region notorious for its danger and unpredictability. The Comanche's domain during this period was well documented, often marked on maps as perilous or impassable for settlers. Yet Atkin was convinced they could navigate safely and secure significant profits. This optimism was rooted more in hope than in sound judgment. The Great Plains were not merely a barrier. They were the sovereign territory of the Comanche, fiercely guarded by a tribe that had mastered the region for generations. Undeterred by warnings, Lee and Atkin assembled a group of hired men and gathered horses to drive their mules westward along the Rio Grande. Lee, ever practical, acquired a cutting-edge pocket watch, a rare and costly device for its time. This watch, which could chime like an alarm, symbolized his commitment to maintaining strict discipline during their journey. Each day at precisely 3:30 a.m., Lee's watch would signal the start of their arduous trek, ensuring the group moved efficiently and made the most of daylight hours. The journey began in early March, with the group traveling westward at a steady pace. The Rio Grande, with its stretches of fertile grasslands, provided vital nourishment for their mules, whose strength was critical to the expedition's success. But even with meticulous planning, the group's decision to enter Comanche territory revealed a profound miscalculation of the dangers ahead. By April, they reached a point southwest of El Paso and chose to rest their mules for several weeks. It was a sensible decision. Well-rested and well-fed animals were essential for the challenging miles ahead. However, halting deep within Comanche territory was a dangerous gamble. though they posted sentinels each night to guard against threats. Their precautions were no match for the highly skilled raiders they would soon face. The Comanche, masters of stealth and ambush, were known to strike with precision and without warning. Their deep knowledge of the terrain made them a nearly invisible threat until it was too late. For Lee and his companions, venturing into Comanche territory was not just a logistical challenge. It was an act of defiance against the tribe whose dominance over the southern plains was unparalleled. What followed would highlight the peril of underestimating the Comanche's power. On April 2, 1855, at around 1 a.m., Nelson Lee completed his patrol, set his alarm, and settled down to rest, unaware that his life was about to be upended. The quiet of the camp was shattered by blood-chilling screams. In the dim glow of the campfire, Lee glimpsed shadowy painted figures moving swiftly through the chaos. It was a Comanche raid. The sentinels, either caught off guard or incapacitated, provided no warning. Before Lee could react, he was lassoed, dragged to the ground, and quickly bound by Comanche warriors. Around him, the camp descended into chaos. Shouts, war cries, and the heavy thud of tomahawks filled the air as the raiders moved from tent to tent. Of the group, only 4 men survived: Nelson Lee, William McKinn, and 2 hired hands, Thomas Martin and John Stewart. The rest met a brutal end. The survivors were stripped of their clothing and dressed in traditional Comanche attire, buckskin leggings and hunting shirts. As the raiders plumbed the camp, they discovered Lee's pocket watch, a rare and intricate object. Intrigued, they demanded that Lee demonstrate its function. When it chimed, their astonishment was evident. Lee, quick-witted and resourceful, seized the opportunity, solemnly winding the watch and making it chime again, deliberately fostering an air of mystery and reverence. He later wrote that he believed the Comanche viewed the watch as a supernatural object, possibly linked to the Great Spirit. That daylight revealed the full horror of the raid's aftermath. Lee's account is chilling. Bodies were mutilated in gruesome ways, disemboweled, scalped, and left as a stark reminder of the Comanche's mastery of psychological warfare. Scalps, still fresh, hung from the warriors' belts, a grim symbol of their dominance. For Lee and his companions, the journey into captivity was a harrowing initiation into the Comanche's methods of psychological and physical control. To instill fear, the captives would feign scalping, brandishing bloody tomahawks, grabbing at the captive's hair, and mimicking the act of scalping, only to stop at the last moment. These acts were more than cruelty. They were demonstrations of control and reminders of the captive's vulnerability. Traveling with the Comanche was an ordeal designed to strip the captives of their humanity. Their faces were covered with deer skins, with small holes cut near the mouth for minimal breathing. Bound hand and foot, they were tied to mules. If a captive fell, they would dangle helplessly, legs secured to the animal. The Comanche found amusement in their suffering. Lee recounted how his tumbles off the mule became a source of laughter and mockery. Even meals were acts of intimidation. Boiling chunks of horseflesh were thrown at the captives, burning their skin. This grim ritual was as much about sustenance as it was about asserting dominance, keeping the captives on edge and stripped of dignity. Nights offered little respite, as the captives were stretched out on their backs, hands and feet tied to stakes, with buffalo hides securing their throats, leaving them immobile and sleepless. While Lee's account emphasizes the terror and brutality he endured, it is crucial to understand the broader context. The Comanche's actions, though horrifying the settlers, were rooted in their struggle for survival and dominance in a rapidly changing world. As a people who had endured displacement before their rise to power, their fierce resistance to settlers was a continuation of their fight to protect their way of life. The raid was not merely an act of violence, but a strategic assertion of control over their territory. By instilling fear, the Comanche sent a clear message to outsiders. Their land was not to be crossed without consequence. Nelson Lee's gripping account continues with the stark details of his captivity. After days of exhausting travel, the Comanche subjected their captives to unimaginable physical and psychological strain. Lee describes being forced to lie flat on his back, with arms and legs stretched and tightly bound to stakes driven into the ground. A buffalo hide was tied under his chin, securing his neck to the ground, rendering him unable to move head, hand, or foot, a living restraint that deprived him of rest and intensified his torment. These conditions persisted for 4 grueling days. When not bound, Lee and the other captives faced equally dehumanizing treatment. Blindfolded and tied to mules, they endured perilous rides where branches and terrain often caused them to fall. Lee recounts how the Comanche mocked his misfortune, treating his tumbles as comedic entertainment. Even meals were turned into tools of humiliation. Boiling chunks of horse meat were hurled at the captives, searing their skin as they scrambled to catch the scalding morsels. On the fourth day, the captives reached what Lee described as a large Comanche village. Though he estimated it housed 500 people and hundreds of tents, this figure may have been exaggerated by his fear and awe. The captives were paraded through the camp and eventually brought before the Comanche chief known as Big Wolf. This leader, whose name evokes strength and mystique, had heard of Lee's unusual pocket watch and demanded to see it in action. Lee's response reveals both his quick thinking and desperation. Declaring that making the watch chime at that moment would wreck the world, Lee cleverly leveraged the Comanche's reverence for the unknown to avoid immediate harm. While Big Wolf seemed skeptical, he did not press the issue, granting Lee a brief moment of reprieve. The relief was fleeting. Lee was taken outside the village where a terrifying ritual awaited. His fellow captives, Otkin, Martin, and Stewart, were already there, bound and stripped. The captives were tied to tall posts, their hands raised high by ropes. Martin and Stewart stood side by side while Akin was positioned opposite them. Lee, too, was stripped and tied alongside Akin, completing the grim scene. What followed was a horrifying display of Comanche warrior culture. In a choreographed procession, warriors armed with tomahawks, knives, and flint spearheads circled the captives. The ceremony began with two warriors stepping forward to scalp Martin and Stewart, removing small patches of skin, an act Lee compared to the size of a silver dollar. Though alive, the two men bled heavily, their cries echoing through the clearing. The warriors continued their procession, letting out war whoops as they passed, raking flint spearheads across Martin and Stewart's bodies. Wounds accumulated with each cycle, leaving the men bloodied and broken. The torment was methodical and relentless, with the warriors seemingly drawing strength from the act. To Lee and Akin's astonishment, they were left untouched during the ordeal, the warriors passing by them multiple times, sparing them while focusing their cruelty on Martin and Stewart. Lee later reflected on the scene with words that captured the horror. How many times they circled, halting with war cries and repeating the same demonic ritual, I cannot say. The psychological strain of witnessing such violence, compounded by the uncertainty of his own fate, left a lasting mark on Lee's mind. To settlers, these acts appeared as unprovoked savagery, but within the context of Comanche culture, such rituals served a deeper purpose. These displays of dominance and brutality were not random. They were affirmations of power, unity, and control for a people who had faced centuries of displacement and marginalization. Asserting authority over captives symbolized the reversal of roles, a way to reclaim agency in a rapidly changing world. For Lee, however, the ceremony marked a descent into a living nightmare. His survival hung by a thread, dependent on both his captors' whims and his ability to navigate their complex social and spiritual codes. This episode, with its blend of ritualized terror and psychological warfare, is a stark testament to the lengths the Comanche would go to preserve their sovereignty and project their strength. The torment inflicted by the Comanche on Nelson Lee and his fellow captives reached its horrific peak as the ritual continued. Lee described the scene with vivid clarity. They engaged in a fiendish task until every inch of the bodies of the unfortunate men was hacked and covered with clotted blood. For Lee, the ordeal was so unbearable that he longed for the ability to choose his own death, rather than endure the relentless cruelty. This harrowing episode underscores the psychological and cultural dimensions of the Comanche's rituals. As historian S.C. Gwynn notes in Empire of the Summer Moon, the Comanche did not shy away from inflicting suffering. They embraced it. Gwynn writes, not only did they inflict horrific suffering, but by all accounts, they took pleasure in it. Making people scream in pain was part of their culture, accepted without question. Between acts of violence, the Comanche paused to smoke tobacco and taunt their captives, mocking Martin for praying and pointing out the gruesome injuries inflicted on him and Stewart. The pause was brief, and the ceremony resumed with a chilling war dance. Two warriors circled the captives before drawing their hatchets and delivering fatal blows to Martin and Stewart, crushing their skulls in an instant. The bodies were discarded without ceremony, leaving Lee and Akin bound and bracing for their own deaths. Yet, to their astonishment, the ritual ended, and they were spared for reasons Lee could not comprehend. The psychological toll of witnessing such brutality deeply scarred Lee, but he clung to a faint hope of survival. His pocket watch, revered by the Comanche as a mystical object, became a tool of leverage. As Akin would later advise, Lee's cooperation and the watch's enigmatic aura could ensure his survival. Akin told him the Comanche believed it to be a living spirit in a silver body. This insight became Lee's lifeline. Akin, however, would not share Lee's fate. Sent to another camp, he offered a brief farewell and left Lee with his parting wisdom. From that moment, Lee never saw or heard of Akin again, and he was presumed dead. For Lee, the years ahead were marked by endurance, resilience, and a relentless determination to escape. Over the next 3 years, Lee lived among various Comanche tribes. His pocket watch continued to command respect, traveling with him and maintaining its status as a sacred object. Following Akin's advice, Lee adapted to his circumstances, serving Big Wolf and other tribal leaders. He performed tasks as needed, gradually earning their trust. Eventually, he was allowed to move freely within the camp and even carry a knife, a significant shift in his status. Big Wolf's tribe gave Lee the nickname Chimako, meaning the good white man. While Lee's relationship with the tribe varied, he still faced cruelty, particularly from a master named Spotted Leopard, who severely injured him after a failed escape attempt. Yet moments of compassion emerged. Women in the tribe, such as a Comanche named Sleek Otter, offered him kindness and protection from the warrior's wrath. Lee's chance for freedom came during a journey with a chief named Rolling Thunder. Ironically, the trip was intended to address the growing threat of white settlers encroaching on Comanche lands. Seizing his moment, Lee grabbed a hatchet and struck Rolling Thunder, burying the blunt edge into the chief's skull. In his own words, seizing the hatchet in that moment, I leapt toward the chief and drove the blunt edge deep into his brain. With the chief incapacitated, Lee armed himself with a rifle and knife, mounted a horse, and fled into the wilderness. His escape marked the end of a 3-year ordeal, a testament to his resilience and resourcefulness. Nelson Lee's escape was as much a test of endurance as it was a triumph of will. He wrote, "In an instant, I pulled the rifle from beneath him and took the long knife from his belt. Then, mounting his horse, I rode wildly away over an unknown path toward freedom." His flight marked the beginning of a perilous journey through an unforgiving wilderness as he sought refuge in the Mexican state of Chihuahua. Navigating the vast and rugged terrain of the Southwest was a daunting challenge. Lee faced natural obstacles at every turn. Cliffs, mountains, and dense brush forced him to backtrack repeatedly. Signs of other native groups in the area kept him on high alert, as he knew his survival depended on avoiding further capture. By day, he used the sun to guide him southward. By night, the North Star served as his compass. Yet, even with his resourcefulness, the isolation and brutality of the landscape began to wear him down. Weeks into his escape, Lee's physical and emotional strength began to falter. He described his condition in stark terms. I was weary in body and spirit. My limbs were swollen, and the wounds and bruises covering me were inflamed and painful. Day by day, I grew weaker as I pressed on. Often, I prayed that when I fell asleep, I might never wake again. These words capture the profound despair he faced, cut off from civilization and uncertain of survival. After nearly a month on the run, even Lee's horse, his most vital companion, succumbed to exhaustion. Forced to abandon the animal, he continued on foot, riding. Now, for the first time, my heart sank within me. For all I could see, civilization was as distant as when I began. I began to doubt myself, to fear that I'd lost my sanity. Alone and weakened, Lee pressed forward, driven by sheer determination. The wilderness itself seemed to conspire against Lee. Rattlesnakes and predators lurked in the shadows, drawn by the scent of his kills after successful hunts. Even the essential act of building a fire to cook food or stay warm became a risk, as the flames, visible over long distances, could attract attention. Comanche patrols or other hostile groups could easily spot his location. To reduce this danger, Lee used natural features like cliffs and thick brush to hide the light, turning survival into a delicate balance of necessity and concealment. Despite these challenges, Lee demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and resilience. His ability to navigate the terrain, avoid detection, and sustain himself amid such adversities speaks to both his survival instincts and his unwavering hope for freedom. Yet, as the journey wore on, it became clear that he was fighting a battle against his own body as much as the elements. Lee's escape is not just a story of physical endurance, but a profound testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. The southwestern wilderness, with its stark beauty and relentless dangers, became both his prison and his proving ground. Every step forward was an act of defiance against despair, a refusal to surrender to the forces that sought to break him. As we follow Lee's journey, we see not only the extraordinary resilience of one man, but also the harsh reality of survival on the frontier, a reality shaped by the unforgiving landscape and the tension between settlers and native tribes. For Lee, this journey was more than a physical escape. It was a test of his will to live. On the 56th day of his grueling escape, Nelson Lee's fate took a miraculous turn. Resting in an open prairie, he was startled by the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoing across the desolate landscape. Gripping his own rifle, he prepared for another encounter with potential captors. But to his immense relief, the figures approaching were not Comanche warriors. They were a group of Mexican hunters, recognizable by their wide-brimmed sombreros, deer hunting in the region. Lee later recounted a simple act that would become his salvation. The group heading home to San Fernando, likely near modern-day Chihuahua, quickly recognized Lee's dire condition. Emaciated, unshaven, and barely recognizable after 3 years of captivity, Lee was a shadow of the man who had once roamed the American frontier. Compassionate and practical, the hunters took him in without hesitation, providing him with life's essentials, water, food, and a horse to ride. For a man who had survived on scraps and raw determination, the gesture was as nourishing to his spirit as it was to his body. The journey to San Fernando took a week, during which the Mexicans shared their limited resources with Lee, offering what little they had without question. For the first time in years, he could eat without fear, drink without rationing, and rest without being pursued. The kindness of these strangers stood in stark contrast to the relentless hostility he had faced during his captivity. Once in San Fernando, Lee was placed under the care of a local doctor. For 6 weeks he remained there, gradually regaining his strength and recovering from the physical and emotional toll of his ordeal. His wounds were treated, his body nourished, and his mind given the space to process the extraordinary journey he had endured. When Lee finally boarded the boat bound for New York, it marked the end of 3 long, harrowing years. His time among the Comanche, defined by captivity, survival, and eventual escape, had come to a close. The journey northward was not merely a return to familiar territory. It was a symbolic crossing back into a life of freedom and safety, far removed from the brutal landscapes of the frontier. Lee's story is not only a testament to human resilience, but also a reminder of the humanity that can shine through even in the harshest circumstances. The generosity of the Mexican hunters, their willingness to aid a stranger, ensured that Lee could live to share his extraordinary tale, a story of survival, endurance, and the unyielding will to return home. In 1858, Nelson Lee stood once again on the familiar ground of the East Coast, far removed from the harsh and untamed frontier where he had endured unimaginable trials. Reflecting on his journey, Lee wrote, "I was home at last, and my time with the Indians was over forever, though I would never forget the horrific scenes of suffering and torture I witnessed among them." His words captured the duality of his emotions, relief at his return to safety and the lasting weight of the memories he carried. Lee's escape from the Comanche and his eventual return to civilization were not just the culmination of years of struggle, they marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Settling into the relative calm of the East Coast, he no longer faced the constant threat of violence that had defined his time on the frontier. The trauma of captivity, the loss of his companions, and the brutal realities of life among the Comanche were behind him, but they remained etched in his mind. Determined to preserve his experiences, Lee began writing his memoir, 3 Years Among the Comanches. The book served not only as a record of his personal survival, but also as a vivid chronicle of life on the frontier. It offered readers insight into the cultural collisions between settlers and native tribes, the harsh dynamics of captivity, and the resilience required to endure such hardships. Lee's journey from captivity to freedom encapsulates the complexities of the 19th century American frontier, a land of opportunity, danger, and cultural entanglements. His narrative reflects not only his personal strength, but also the broader tensions between settlers and native tribes during this tumultuous period. While his return to the East Coast marked the end of his physical trials, it also symbolized his transition from a participant in the raw, violent realities of the West to a chronicler of its stories. In his memoir, Lee ensured that the voices of his companions, the stark beauty of the landscape, and even the practices of his Comanche captors would endure. His survival and the legacy of his writing remind us of the profound human will to persevere and the importance of preserving the stories of those who lived through history's most challenging moments.